Spring of 2006, Butler County, Nebraska. The corn was up, not by much, but it was there. A tender green haze over the long, dark furrows of earth. It was a promise, a down payment on autumn. In Butler County, that was the only promise that mattered. The promise of corn, knee-high by the 4th of July. The promise of heavy, drooping ears in August. The promise of combines rolling in October, filling trucks with yellow gold. Evelyn Schmidt saw the promise. She was 71 years old. She had seen that same green haze 64 times from the window of the same farmhouse. She knew its worth. She knew its cost. And on a Tuesday morning in late May, she decided to break it. The tractor was a John Deere 4020. It was 40 years old. The paint faded to the color of a tired pea. The metal of the fenders worn smooth by decades of hands and denim. Her husband, Frank, had bought it new. He had loved it. It was the only machine on the farm she had ever truly mastered. It was honest. It had no computers, no GPS. It ran on diesel and grease and stubbornness, much like Evelyn herself. She hitched the disc harrow to the 3-point. The steel was heavy, the blades sharpened just last winter in Frank's old workshop. The grease points were all checked. The tires were full. The fuel tank was topped off. She performed the ritual with a slow, deliberate economy of motion. Nothing wasted. No step repeated. She climbed into the seat, the vinyl cracked and patched with silver duct tape. The engine turned over with a familiar, smoky cough, then settled into a low, percussive rhythm that vibrated through the soles of her worn leather boots. She drove the 4020 out of the machine shed and pointed it toward the east quarter section. 160 acres, prime bottomland, black, rich soil that could grow corn to the sky. This year it was planted with Pioneer Hybrid 33T57. The seed had cost her $68 a bag. She had used 200 bags, $13,600. The nitrogen fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia, had been custom applied a week before planting. Another $7,000. $20,600 already sunk into the ground. And the corn was up, 4 inches high, perfect uniform rows stretching toward the horizon. A textbook stand. Evelyn Schmidt lowered the disc harrow into the soil. The blades bit into the earth. They sliced through the roots of the young corn plants, churning the green shoots under, turning the perfect rows back into a chaos of black soil. She drove a straight line, her eyes fixed on a fence post at the far end of the field. The tractor did not waver. The harrow did its work. Behind her, the green haze was erased. Behind her, $20,000 was being buried. She did not look back. She worked all day. She stopped only once, at noon, to eat a sandwich she had packed in a metal lunchbox. Bologna on white bread, an apple, a thermos of black coffee. She sat on the tractor tire in the Nebraska sun and looked out over the half-tilled field. The work was not yet done. She finished her coffee, placed the thermos back in the box, and climbed back into the seat. The engine coughed back to life. The work continued. By dusk, it was finished. The 160 acres were a flat, dark expanse of worked soil. Not a speck of green remained. The promise was gone. The investment was gone. The next morning she drove her old Ford pickup into David City, to the Farmers Cooperative Association. She walked past the men who were standing by the coffee machine, their talk of grain prices and rainfall predictions momentarily silenced by her entrance. They nodded. She nodded back. She went to the counter. The young man behind it, a boy whose grandfather she had gone to school with, asked how he could help her. His name was Kevin. She needed seed. He assumed it was for replanting. A hailstorm, maybe, or a low spot that had drowned out. It happened. She needed sorghum. Kevin paused. He blinked. Sorghum. Grain sorghum. Milo. Whatever you wanted to call it, it was not a Butler County crop. That was for the dry lands, for Kansas, for the Texas Panhandle. Here, on irrigated ground, you planted corn, or maybe soybeans. You did not plant sorghum. It was a waste of good soil, a waste of water, a waste of potential profit. He asked if she was sure. She was sure. She needed enough for 160 acres. She wanted a medium early maturity hybrid, something from DeKalb or Pioneer, whatever they had. She wasn't picky, as long as it was treated with a safener for the herbicide she planned to use. They had DeKalb DKS 37-07 in stock. It would work. It was $72 a bag. She would need 160 bags. $11,520. She wrote a check from the farm account. The check was good. Everyone knew the Schmidts paid their bills. Kevin and another boy loaded the bags onto her truck. The pallets strained the old Ford's suspension. She thanked them and drove away, leaving a cloud of confused silence in her wake at the co-op. The story was all over the county by lunchtime. Evelyn Schmidt had plowed under a perfect stand of corn. She had bought sorghum seed. The men at the co-op had one word for it: grief. Frank had been gone 2 years now. A heart attack, sudden and final, right in the middle of harvest. Frank was the farmer. Everyone knew that. Evelyn kept the books. Evelyn drove the grain truck. Evelyn ran the house. But Frank made the decisions. Frank knew the land. Without him, she was lost. The sorghum was proof. At the diner on Main Street, the talk was the same. Over plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the farmers dissected the decision. It made no economic sense. Corn was trading at over $3 a bushel on the Chicago Board of Trade. New ethanol plants were being built all over the state, driving demand through the roof. The government mandated it. You couldn't lose money on corn in 2006 if you tried. Sorghum, on the other hand, was a feed grain. Its price was tied to corn, but always lower. The yields were lower. The profits were lower. It was simple math. She was throwing money away. Good money. Frank's money. In the pews of St. Mary's Catholic Church that Sunday, the women had a softer explanation. But it was still rooted in the same idea. The poor dear. She wasn't thinking straight. The farm was too much for her at her age. Alone in that big house. The grief had finally caught up to her. It manifested in strange ways. Plowing under a field. Planting a crop that didn't belong. It was a cry for help. Her children, both grown and gone to Omaha and Denver, should be checking on her. Someone should step in. But no one did. Evelyn spent the next 2 days planting the sorghum. She used the same John Deere tractor, this time pulling an old 6-row planter. It was slow work. The machine was not built for precision. It dropped seeds with a mechanical clatter, a rhythm she knew by heart. She drove, her eyes on the marker line from the previous pass, ensuring the rows were straight. She was not crying for help. She was working. When the sorghum was in the ground, she waited. The ridicule was not malicious. It was the casual, confident mockery of a community that believed it knew best. It was the humor of hindsight, applied in advance. Young farmers in new, air-conditioned tractors would drive by her field, shake their heads, and chuckle. They would call their neighbors on their cell phones. "You won't believe what the old widow Schmidt is up to now." Their own corn, in the fields adjacent to hers, was already recovering from the brief shock of being planted. It was growing, reaching for the sun. A vibrant, profitable green. Her field remained black. For a week, then two. Then, faint green lines appeared. The sorghum had germinated. It was a tougher plant than corn, slower to start, more cautious. It did not leap from the ground. It emerged. By mid-June, her neighbor's corn was waist-high, a dense, dark green jungle. Her sorghum was barely a foot tall, a thin, almost pathetic-looking collection of grassy shoots. The contrast was stark. It was a living monument to her poor decision. The conventional wisdom of Butler County was clear. The land was for corn. The economy was for corn. The future was for corn. The entire agricultural infrastructure was built around it. The grain elevators had massive dryers built specifically for corn. The ethanol plants consumed it by the trainload. The livestock operations fed it. The seed companies poured hundreds of millions of dollars into developing new corn hybrids that could push yields higher and higher. 200 bushels per acre. 250. 300 was the dream. This was the era of the corn boom. A confluence of government policy and global demand had turned the humble grain into a source of unprecedented wealth for the American Midwest. The Renewable Fuel Standard, signed into law the year before, mandated the blending of biofuels like ethanol into the nation's gasoline supply. It created an artificial, guaranteed market for corn. Prices soared. Land values followed. A farmer in Butler County in 2006 had one job: plant corn, maximize yield, take the check to the bank, buy more land, buy bigger equipment, repeat. It was a simple, intoxicating formula. To deviate from that formula was not just a financial mistake. It was a form of social deviance. It was a rejection of the collective project. It was a statement that you knew better than your neighbors, better than the market, better than the experts at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Agricultural Extension. And for that statement to come from a 71-year-old widow, a woman who was supposed to be in the twilight of her farming life, was especially jarring. It was interpreted as senility, as a failure to adapt, as the final, sad chapter of a long and respectable family history on the land. Frank Schmidt would be rolling in his grave, they said. He loved corn. He was a master at growing it. His fields were always the cleanest, his yields among the highest in the county. He would never have stood for this. Evelyn heard the whispers. She was not deaf. She saw the looks when she went to town for groceries, the mixture of pity and condescension. She knew what they were saying at the co-op. She knew what they thought of her. She did not engage. She did not explain. She bought her groceries, paid her bills, and went back to the farm. She tended her sorghum. She cultivated it once to control the weeds. She walked the rows, checking for pests. The crop grew slowly, steadily. It was not a dramatic plant like corn. It did not shoot for the sky. It built its foundation. It sent roots deep into the black soil, deeper than corn roots ever went. It was a patient crop, a survivor. That summer was a good one for farmers in Butler County. The rains came at the right times. The heat was present but not oppressive. The corn pollinated perfectly. By August, the fields were a magnificent sight. Towering green stalks, each bearing one, sometimes two, large, heavy ears. The yield estimates were phenomenal. 200 bushels was not just possible, it was expected. Evelyn's sorghum grew too. It tasseled out, producing a feathery plume at the top of the stalk. Then the grain head began to form, a tight cluster of small berries that would slowly mature from green to a rusty red. It was a healthy crop, but next to the towering corn, it looked meager, insignificant. Harvest came in October. The big combines, costing $500,000 apiece, rolled through the cornfields, their massive heads stripping the ears from the stalks, their internal mechanisms shelling the kernels, their augers pouring a golden stream into the grain carts that struggled to keep up. The yields were even better than predicted, 220 bushels per acre, a bin-busting crop. The prices were still strong. Farmers were ecstatic. They were paying off debt. They were buying new pickups. They were booking vacations to Florida. Evelyn harvested her sorghum with an older, smaller combine. A John Deere 6620, also bought by Frank. She had to use a special header, a row crop header designed for the narrower rows of sorghum. It was a slower process. The dust was finer, more irritating. Her yield was 130 bushels per acre. It was a good yield for sorghum, a very good yield. But the price was $1 a bushel less than corn. The math was simple. Her neighbors on identical land had grossed over $650 per acre. She had grossed just over $300. She had left more than $300 per acre on the table. On a 160-acre field, that was a difference of nearly $50,000. $50,000. The number solidified the community's opinion. It was no longer a matter of speculation. The data was in. Evelyn Schmidt's grief, her stubbornness, her foolishness had a price tag, and it was $50,000. The next spring, in 2007, everyone expected her to come to her senses. She had had her moment of eccentricity. She had indulged her strange whim. Now she would get back to business. She would plant corn. She planted sorghum. The entire cycle repeated itself. The plowing, the planting, the whispers at the co-op, the pitying looks at the grocery store. The stark contrast between her thin, grassy field and the lush corn surrounding it. Another good year for weather. Another record corn harvest. Another year where Evelyn left tens of thousands of dollars in the field. And again in 2008, the year of the financial crisis. The stock market crashed. Banks failed. But commodity prices, driven by global demand and the relentless thirst of the ethanol industry, remained high. Corn was a safe haven. It was real. You could touch it. You could sell it. Planting corn was the smartest thing a person could do. Evelyn planted sorghum. By now, the novelty had worn off. Her decision was no longer a topic of hot gossip. It was just a fact of life in Butler County. Old Widow Schmidt plants sorghum. The sun rises in the east. The sky is blue. It was incorporated into the local folklore, a cautionary tale, a punchline. Her field became a landmark. People would give directions by it. You go 2 miles past the crazy sorghum field, then turn left. The pity hardened into a kind of resigned frustration. She was stubborn. She was wasting good land. Land that a young farmer would kill to have. Land that could be producing wealth, feeding the world, fueling cars. Instead, it was producing a second-rate feed grain, all because of the whims of an old woman. And in 2009, sorghum. And in 2010, sorghum. And in 2011, sorghum. 6 straight years. 6 years of watching her neighbors get rich on corn. 6 years of being the town eccentric. 6 years of quietly, methodically tending a crop that everyone else considered a waste of time. She never offered an explanation. She never complained. She drove her old tractor, planted her seed, harvested her crop, and sold her grain. She paid her taxes. She maintained the farmstead. The paint on the barn was never peeling. The fences were always tight. From the outside, her life was one of quiet, ordered, and deeply unprofitable stubbornness. Inside the farmhouse, she kept charts. Not on a computer, but in old accounting ledgers, the kind with green paper and neat columns. She tracked rainfall, not just by the inch, but by the day. She had weather records for her farm going back to the 1950s, meticulously recorded first by her father-in-law, then by Frank, now by her. She noted the dates of the last spring frost and the first autumn freeze. She noted the subsoil moisture levels, which she measured herself with a hand auger, a tool few modern farmers even owned anymore. She was not looking at the markets. She was not looking at government reports. She was not listening to the coffee shop talk. She was watching the land, and she was watching the sky. And she saw a pattern, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. The spring rains were coming earlier and harder. The summers were getting hotter, the heat arriving sooner and staying longer. The deep subsoil moisture, the reserve bank of water that protected against a dry spell, was not recharging as it used to in the winter. Each year, the level was a little lower. Each year, the farm was getting a little thirstier. The good years, the years of record corn yields, were masking the change. The timely rains had been just enough. The center pivot irrigation systems, drawing water from the Ogallala aquifer, could make up for any short-term deficit. The new corn hybrids were bred to be resilient. The system had buffers. It had redundancies. But Evelyn saw that the buffers were shrinking. The margin for error was getting thinner. The whole magnificent, profitable enterprise of corn farming in Butler County was predicated on one thing: the assumption that the water would always be there, that the rains would come, that the wells would not run dry. It was a big assumption. Sorghum was different. Its ancestors were from Africa. It was a plant born of heat and drought. It had a waxy coating on its leaves that reduced evaporation. It had a massive, fibrous root system that could seek out water far deeper than corn. And it had a special trick. When a drought became severe, it did not simply wither and die like corn. It went dormant. It waited. It could shut down its growth for weeks, and then, if rain finally came, it could reawaken and continue its journey to making grain. Corn could not do that. Corn was a fragile giant. It had one crucial 2-week window during pollination. If it was stressed by heat or lack of water during that window, the silks would dry up. The pollen would fail. The ears would develop with scattered kernels, or no kernels at all. The entire year's crop would be lost. There was no second chance. Evelyn Schmidt was not betting against her neighbors. She was not making a statement. She was not consumed by grief. She was hedging. She was taking out an insurance policy that no company could sell her. An insurance policy written in the genetic code of a humble African grass. She was trading the spectacular profits of the good years for the certainty of survival in a bad one. For 6 years, her bet had looked like a fool's errand. Then came the winter of 2011 to 2012. It was a non-winter. The snow never came. The ground never froze solid. The temperatures were so mild that farmers were in their fields in February, a time they were usually in their workshops fixing machinery. The old-timers said it was an open winter, a gift. It meant an early spring, an early start to planting. Evelyn saw it differently. No snow meant no snowmelt. No snowmelt meant the subsoil moisture would not be replenished. The bank account was already low, and there would be no winter deposit. Spring came early, as predicted. It was warm and dry. Farmers got their corn in the ground in record time. It emerged beautifully. By May, the fields of Butler County were once again a perfect carpet of green. The commodity analysts were predicting the biggest corn crop in American history. The price of corn softened a little in anticipation of the massive supply. But no one was worried. The demand was still there. Evelyn planted her sorghum, the 7th year. The ritual was the same. The reaction was the same, though by now it was so muted as to be almost non-existent. It was just what she did. Then June arrived, and the rain stopped. It did not just stop. The sky shut off. A massive, stubborn ridge of high pressure parked itself over the center of the country. It blocked the flow of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. It deflected storms to the north into Canada. It sat there, day after day, week after week, like a lid on a pot. The sun beat down. The temperatures climbed. 90 degrees, 95, 100, 105. The wind blew, a hot, dry wind from the south that sucked the moisture from the soil, from the leaves of the plants. They called it the devil's breath. At first, the farmers were not overly concerned. They had seen dry spells before. They had irrigation. They turned on their center pivots. The massive steel structures crawled in slow circles, spraying life-giving water drawn from the aquifer deep below. The corn drank it up. For a while, it was enough. But the pivots could not cool the air. They could not block the relentless sun. They could not stop the hot, dry wind. And they were running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, pulling on the aquifer harder than ever before. The water table began to drop. Wells that had never failed began to sputter. Evelyn did not have irrigation on her sorghum field. It was dry land. It was on its own. By late June, her sorghum had stopped growing. It was waist-high. Its leaves rolled tight into thin, spiky tubes to conserve water. It had gone dormant. It was waiting. The corn could not wait. The corn was approaching its critical pollination window. It was a magnificent crop, tall and green, but it was a cosmetic beauty. It was living on borrowed water, and its thirst was insatiable. It was beginning to show signs of stress. The lower leaves were turning yellow. In the heat of the afternoon, the top leaves would curl, a condition farmers called pineappling. They prayed for rain. They watched the forecasts. The meteorologists offered no hope. The high-pressure dome was locked in place. No rain in sight. July came, the heart of the summer, the make-or-break month for corn. The heat intensified. 108 degrees, 110. The corn began to tassel, the pollen-bearing structures emerging from the top of the plants. It was a desperate, premature act. The plants knew they were dying. They were trying to reproduce before it was too late. But the heat was too extreme. At temperatures above 95 degrees, corn pollen is sterilized. It becomes non-viable. The silks, the receptive tubes that are meant to catch the pollen, dried to a crisp brown almost as soon as they emerged from the ear shoots. The pollination failed. It was a complete, catastrophic failure across millions of acres. The farmers watched it happen in slow motion. They saw their magnificent-looking fields turn into a green desert. The stalks were there, the leaves were there, but the ears were empty. Cobs with no kernels, or cobs with a few scattered, aborted kernels. A total loss. The irrigation pivots continued to run, but now they were just wasting water. They were watering a dead crop. By the end of July, many farmers shut them off. The cost of electricity to run the pumps was too high. There was no point. The green stalks of corn turned a sickly tan, then a brittle brown. The fields looked like it was late October, but it was the beginning of August. The silence was eerie. No rustle of leaves in the wind, just a dry, dead crackle. The drought of 2012 became the worst in half a century. It covered more than 80% of the United States. It was a national disaster. Corn prices on the Chicago Board of Trade skyrocketed to over $8 a bushel. A cruel irony for farmers who now had no corn to sell. The talk in the diner, at the co-op, was no longer of record yields and new pickups. It was of bankruptcy, of crop insurance